Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by u/turquoise umbrella, so credits to him. This is how you kill a Wendigo. My twin sister Janessa was murdered at age 16. I witnessed it like a coward from atop a tree in the forest where it happened. I'd actually blacked out the memory for a while. I knew she was dead, but I couldn't remember how it happened. It wasn't until I tried therapy that it slowly came back to me. I was also reminded of how much my parents used to fight. Our family was planning on a camping trip the day before my sister's death. Before leaving, my parents erupted into another massive fight. Janessa and I had been looking forward to the trip, and once again our parents' awful communication skills was ruining it before it even began. We snuck out of the house and took a lift to the forest. We left our phones at home, not caring whether our parents would be worried sick. We enjoyed ourselves the first day. I set up our tent, made a fire, had s'mores, and did all that stuff one typically associated with camping. The next morning everything changed. I woke up alone in our tent. Outside I hear my sister talking to someone. Inquisitive, I opened the tent and saw someone sitting at our now-out campfire who looked just like me. The figure transformed as soon as Janessa realized it wasn't me. Together we ran off, that thing rushing after us with heavy steps. I was faster than my sister and a bit more athletic. I grabbed onto a tree branch and climbed up a tree. Janessa was not so lucky. I watched it happen. I watched that thing tear my sister to pieces. I'm still haunted by her screams. I also understand now why she always appears badly mutilated in my nightmares. I stayed up in that tree overnight, my sister's corpse lying in the leaves. Her remaining eye always staring up at me. While in therapy there was a moment when I suddenly recalled the hallucination I had the morning after my sister's death. I thought I saw her corpse clawing at the tree where I hid. She wanted me to come down and join her. It caused me to panic and cry out. A couple of men who had been camping in the area heard my screams, and at last I was rescued. My parents don't argue anymore. I hardly see them at all anymore since my sister's death. We're an upper-middle-class family. Over the last couple of years my parents have frequently gone on vacations. They don't tell me where and I never ask. I usually just wake up and find out they've left yet again. I'm out of high school now and I have no career path yet. I've only really had one thing on my mind since I remembered what killed Janessa. Now I'm returning to the forest where she died. Now I'm going to go after the thing that killed her. I've been preparing for this, and if it is a Wendigo like I've suspected, then I'm more than ready to take my revenge. This is how I'm doing it. I took a lift again. Had the driver known what I was carrying in my bags, I doubt they would have let me in. As I sat there, the realization of what I was doing grew heavily on me. What the hell am I doing? I've been talking myself up for the last couple of years. As much as I want a glorious victory, the closer I've come to this day, the more I daydream about dying the same way Janessa did. As angry as I am with my parents, I don't think they deserve to lose their only remaining child. But I just can't move on knowing that thing is still out there. My legs were as dense as gold once I tried to exit the cab. The driver watched awkwardly as I struggled to pull myself out while putting on my backpack and working to carry the other supplies. Why was I doing this alone? I don't want anyone else getting hurt in this, I think was my reasoning. But God, I wish I wasn't out here doing this alone. With each step I took into the forest, the more the terror numbed. I was in the domain of the Wendigo now. I wasn't entirely sure how much of the information about them was real. I knew they could change their appearance. I know that their true form is just like the drawings people have made. There's no way to be an expert on these things unless you've actually dealt with one. I'm still not sure why it decided not to come after me. Based on its size, I doubt it would have had any difficulty. Instead, I'm still alive and crazy enough to come back and pick a fight. As I set up camp, I found myself jumping at the sound of any bird call or movement from a nearby animal. The way I hammered in my tent, I knew I was calling attention to myself. In my left pants pocket was a gun. Like werewolves, I'd heard that silver bullets were necessary to kill Wendigos. What if I'm wrong? The thought had been with me ever since I'd stepped foot back into these woods. I stopped frequently while setting up. Behind a nearby tree, I was almost certain I could see someone watching me and then hiding behind it again. I didn't bother to walk over and check it out. I finished up my tent and made up my sleeping bag inside. As I did this, I heard calls that sounded almost human off in the distance. It probably knew I was here. The minutes went by slowly, but soon dusk set upon the forest. I built a fire like the one Janessa and I had made. I roasted 2 marshmallows. Despite her absence, I made a s'more for her as well, resting it on a sizable rock near the fire. As I ate it, I thought about our last night together. All things considered, it was pleasant. Being twins, we had moments where we'd gotten into arguments like our parents. We'd fought one another. We had our problems. But that night had been pleasant. I'd actually been glad we'd decided to camp without our parents. As frightened as I still was, I felt a warmth not from the fire. A sense of calm overcame me as my memories were suddenly flooded with the good times Janessa and I had. The good times were not for long. I could hear footsteps not far behind me. Jeremy. I could never forget that voice. It sounded just like Janessa, but I knew it wasn't her. For some reason, I felt compelled to sit there calmly. As it approached, I could tell it was going over to take a seat at the rock where I'd left the s'more. I glanced delicately to my right. I watched as a figure that looked almost identical to the Janessa I remembered pick up the s'more and take a bite. "That's not yours." I surprised myself blurting that out. The fake Janessa ignored me, continuing to scarf it down. My terror turned to anger. The thing responsible for my sister's death was standing right next to me, mocking my grief. I didn't wait for it to finish. I pulled out my gun and pointed it directly at the figure. Before I could fire, the creature jumped to the left and turned around. I was struck with paralysis when I saw the mutilated face of my sister's corpse staring back at me. "I'm trapped, Jeremy." I struggled to keep aim. How dare that thing pretend to be her? It won't let me go. And it won't let you go either. We can be together again. It's so much nicer than going home to an empty house and unloving parents. She held her hand out to me. "Trust me, brother. Please." My trigger finger felt as though struck with a serious case of arthritis. Janessa took a step towards me. "Wait, no. It's not Janessa. Why did I suddenly forget that? Feed the forest with me, Jeremy. It's so much better being dead. PPR, prove it." At last I pulled the trigger. The creature hollered in pain as it fell to the ground. I'd hit a lung, which wouldn't be enough. I aimed the gun at its heart, but failed to pull the trigger as it rolled over and jumped back to its feet. Within seconds it transformed from a corpse of my sister to its massive dark skeletal form with massive antlers. My mind was caught between fight and flight. I stood there aiming my gun but desperately wanted to flee. As it rushed towards me, I chose the later option. I rushed over to the bag I'd left near the tent. Inside was a weapon I'd built myself. As I rushed over, I could tell I wasn't going to be able to outrun it. I fired another shot. The bullet lodged itself inside the neck of the beast. It cried out once more, buying me a bit of time to get to the bag. Why did I have it zipped up? As I tried to open it, the Wendigo rushed towards me again. Just like on the day of Janessa's death, I ran from the campsite, further into the forest. History was repeating itself. I was going to fail to avenge my sister. My parents were going to lose their last remaining child, all because I couldn't let this go. After at least several minutes, I'd somehow managed to keep outrunning it. I refused to slow down and look behind my shoulder. As I kept running, I noticed that I'd gone in some sort of circle. Up ahead of me was the campsite. I had a chance to grab the bag and pulled out the weapon. The closer I came to the campsite, the louder the Wendigo's footsteps became. I could almost feel the wind as the creature tried to claw at me. Once I reached the campsite, I put my hand out, clutching the bag. It felt like almost too great a risk to put my gun back in my pocket, but I needed free to pull out the weapon. I managed to do just that and used my left hand to pull out a long metal spike. I'd built it in such a way as to have the spike shoot out at the push of a button. The Wendigo wasn't going to slow down until it had me. I had no choice. I had to turn around. I had to have perfect timing. I had to collect my debt from the creature that took my twin sister. Chew on this, you son of a bitch. I turned around, pressing the button that shot the spike out. Less than a foot from my face was the Wendigo, its cry so loud my ears hurt and began to ring. I'd done it. The spike had pierced the heart. Silver. Weakly the Wendigo tried to swipe at me, but somehow lacked the strength. The next part was a gamble. I pulled out my gun and shot it in the head. It wasn't going to be enough to end the Wendigo, assuming what I'd read up was correct. I rushed back over to where I'd dropped my bag. Inside was a silver axe I'd also designed myself. When I returned, the creature was still conscious, letting out continuous agonizing cries. I felt no sympathy. I hacked away at its wrists first. Its claws were the biggest threat and I wanted them gone. Despite the weightlifting I'd been doing, it took over a dozen hacks to remove the first long-fingered hand. I pulled out my gun and shot it again in the head. It subdued the creature long enough for me to remove the second hand, and then I began on its head. As it began waking up again, I found myself screaming at the creature. I demanded it stay dead, calling it every insulting name that came to mind. Once I'd hacked most of the way through its head, I pulled it off. I kicked it a couple of feet away. The Wendigo no longer moved. It took over an hour, but I'd managed to put each limb, the head, and torso in the trash bags I'd brought along. One by one I carried them back to the campsite. I lit another fire, burning each bag. It took until dawn for me to burn the body. I left the torso for last. It was a struggle, but I managed to remove the heart, rip it to pieces, and placed it in a silver box. After locking it, I looked around the site and decided to leave everything except my gun and the box behind. I was never particularly religious, but in the months leading up to my fight I'd gotten to know a priest at a church in my area called Street Alphonsus. Luckily for me, he was there when I arrived with the silver box. His face went several shades paler when I showed it to him. Nevertheless, he escorted me to the back of the church with a pair of shovels and helped me bury it. Once done, I sat there, suddenly flooded with overwhelming emotions. I did it. The Wendigo had been slain. I'd done it. My sister's killer was dead, its body was burned, its heart in pieces and buried. Janessa. I cried out. I kept my promise. I killed it. The Wendigo can't get anyone else. It won't kill anyone else. I placed my lowered head in my hands and continued to cry. I'm sorry I wasn't braver before, I whimpered. I'm so sorry I wasn't stronger before. I placed some flowers on my sister's grave an hour later. I talked to her tombstone as though she was there listening. I'd like to believe she was, and that she was pleased with my accomplishment. Afterwards I returned home and slept through the day and all night. Once morning came, I heard some noise downstairs. I went down to see that my parents were home and sitting down to breakfast. They stopped and looked over at me, saying nothing. I walked over and pulled up a seat. I had no appetite at all. How was your trip? Where did you guys go? My parents exchanged looks before my father replied. We went out west to visit your aunt and uncle. Did you enjoy it? I had difficulty keeping my chin from quivering as I lowered my head again. Jeremy, sweetie, what's wrong? Both my mother and my father got up and came over to me. Why do you keep leaving me alone? God damn it, I'm the only kid you have left. Don't you give a fuck about me? They hugged me tightly, offering apologies. I could have sworn I felt another pair of hands on my shoulders. Their light touch was the most comforting of all. I really hope Janessa is proud of me. But a new task was ahead of me now. A harder task, perhaps. I was going to have to figure out how to reconcile with my parents. Our family had been broken long before her death. We'll never be whole again, but I know with some effort we can be better than this. Second story. This story was shared by you/Groovy97, so credits to him. I saw something in the woods of Canada. This is a story I haven't really told anyone. It's one of those memories that, no matter how much time goes by, you never forget. The details don't get muddy for even a moment. It was 2012, my freshman year of high school. I was 15 years old and had been in the company of my best friend that night. Let's call her Marie. We lived in a fairly small town on the eastern coast of Canada, Nova Scotia to be exact. It was an old mining community sat in the middle of the woods. To paint a picture for you, there wasn't really much to do. Our economy had tanked many moons before the rest of the country, so outside of hard drugs or crime all you really had to do was walk around. Marie and I just so happened to have made walking a bit of a natural pastime. We'd properly mapped out that entire town and its surrounding hills and forests in rain, shine, sleet or snow. We'd seen everything our little community had to offer, from its vast range of wildlife to its colorful selection of junkies. Please, keep these tidbits in mind before you tell me what we saw was an animal or a human. It was an autumn night, with nothing more for two high school girls to do and homework not being something we specialized in. We decided to go on one of our many town walks. This night in particular had us go a little off the beaten trail. You see, typically we'd have stuck to the main roads, probably ended up at a Tim Hortons before calling it a night and heading back home, but not tonight. Tonight we decided to walk by the food bank. You might be wondering what the draw of an old food bank is. You see, it wasn't just a food bank. Back when we were still a mining town, our food bank was a train station. Trains would come by and pick up coal that was freshly dug from the coal mines and take it all across the country. The old train yard was still there, its now rust-covered cars acting as mock tombs to a much more prosperous era gone by. We'd frequented the train yard with our friends in the past, climbing the cars, sneaking inside among other things that could have gotten kids hurt, so it wasn't a new place to us at all, and we thought that since it was at the tree line, tucked away in a quiet enough part of town that we could freely walk and chat without the concern of traffic or the like. Sidewalks weren't very frequent on that side of town. The sun had already set as we made our way down the long stretch of road, that October chill grasping at our small frames like glue, while the all too familiar autumn smell of still dying plant life had permeated the air. We were talking to each other about what teenage girls typically babble about: boys, Facebook, real important stuff. We had been so caught up in our conversation of the most dire importance that by the time we had made it to the fence that lined the train yard, it genuinely took us a moment to notice the noise. It was a very clear scream. We stopped dead in our tracks and began to stare at each other, not so much out of fear but bewilderment. It didn't quite sound like an animal, but it definitely didn't sound human either. I've gotten up close and personal with enough cougars, wolves, and toddlers to know that this screaming we were hearing was caught somewhere in between man and beast. We stood there, glaring into each other's eyes for a few more seconds before finally turning our attention towards the sound. It was dark, mind you, not pitch black as there were some street lights around, though few and far between, but we couldn't see anything. To us from where we were standing, it was just an old train station turned food bank, a rusted out fence, and a couple of unused and falling apart train cars. The screams didn't subside as we were now staring into the foreground of what became a series of mental photographs of the area. It was then I realized that just up ahead, the third and final train car sat partially covered from our viewpoint by a few bushes. I had turned my head to Marie, a mischievous grin donning my face like a cowl. "Last one to the train car has to buy the French vanillas," I exclaimed before quickly jogging along the side of the fence toward the final car. I heard Marie call out, "Hey! Wait up," as my feet clearly were acting before my brain. I mean, gosh, this could have been some wild animal or really anything, and I was just running into blind. I'm not particularly a brave person, and I'm honestly not sure why I did this or anything else that happens from here on out. I rounded the fence, the screaming getting louder and louder as I strode closer and closer. My heart began to race with both anxiety and sheer excitement. I wasn't sure what I was even getting myself into or what I was expecting to see at all. Needless to say, about a second later the ever-increasing beating from my chest had come to a standstill as my heart had made itself a new home in my throat. I stopped so quickly Marie had slammed right into the back of me, but I was so frozen in fear at what I was now looking at that I barely even budged, the screaming still echoing off of the forest so loudly I could barely hear the faint whisper of an "oh my God" escape Marie's lips. No more than about 20 feet away from us, crouched just under the train car, was a pale, hairless and naked person. It was just sitting there under the front of the car, screaming into the darkness of the autumn night. Each time it screamed, its arms would leer forward from under the car. They extended out to an unnatural length, almost like two tree branches. We both stood there, frozen in a mixture of fear and confusion. What were they doing? Were they hurt? On drugs? A million questions had begun to race through my head, and one look at Marie's face had told me the same questions were racking her mind as well. We must have stood there just watching in complete awe for what felt like 5 minutes, but realistically it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, maybe a minute at the most. That's when, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to take a few steps closer. I took my first shaky step towards it. I felt Marie's hand grasp my arm as if to say don't, but it was clear that her fear outweighed her functionality as I easily broke from her grip just by continuing forward. I had closed about 5 or so feet of distance before stopping. I continued to stare at it from my position for another moment before clearing my throat and stammering the words, "Hey, are you okay?" The second I said those words, any thought of this being a person in need of help had flown out the window and dissipated in the cool nighttime air. Almost as if someone had hit stop on a recording, the screaming it had been happy to emit had ceased, and then it was staring at us. You need to understand, it didn't seem to even move its head. It was just 1 second staring forward into the night and the next right back toward us. A faint growl began to seep into the area now from where it was positioned as I took in the details of its face, in which I had become sure it wasn't human. It had a mouth that seemed to take up the width of most of its face, like a thin crack in a slab of concrete. Its eyes were small but almost glowed in through the darkness with the most piercing yellow I have ever seen. After it had taken its time to mimic our staring back at us, its crack-like mouth had almost cartoonishly curled into a smiling man-like grin, its lips parting to reveal its long, jagged, and razor-like teeth. The beast and I continued locked into this war of attrition, though it was admittedly clearly more confident in being the dominant one in the exchange of looks. It broke the stare down after another moment, bringing its long, twiggy arms up from under the train car. It wrapped its fingers around the lip of the car and at a near breakneck speed kicked itself out from under the train car with a swing, almost like a chimpanzee leaping from one tree branch to another before landing and planting itself on the ground in a pose akin to that of a frog. It continued to its gaze, which now had begun to feel as though I was being sized up. My whole body had been shaking at what was akin to Mach 5. I tried to avert my eyes, look anywhere else, as it felt like any moment I would pass out in sheer terror, but I was drawn in. It felt almost like it had me in some sort of trance. I watched as it slowly began to stand, unfurling itself from the position it was in. It just seemed to get taller and taller until what I was looking at was at its full stance. Its entire body, a pasty gray. Its arms had drooped down well past its knees and its legs hooked in the back near the calf, almost like a goat. The words "I'm not religious in the slightest," though I was raised Catholic in my younger years, and the only words I could think to muster were "Hail Mary, full of grace," as I began to pray and stared down what I was sure was my end. The creature then leered itself forward, throwing its arms back as its jaw unhinged itself from its skull and dropped down to about its collarbones as it let out one final shriek, the noise embedding itself in my brain and making sure not to ever leave, to forever haunt my nightmares along with the image. I closed my eyes so tight my head began to hurt. I could feel tears streaming down my cheeks with my lips pierced close so tightly that not even a breath could escape them, and then nothing. Silence. Deafening silence. Was it over? That quickly? Was I dead? I slowly opened one eye, peeking out. I saw it, a final look. It had retaken its crouching position, giving us its final glance as well before it turned its back to us. An encounter that had felt like it lasted hours had then swiftly ended in that of a few mere seconds as the creature leapt from its position to the tree-line, and then one final leap into the woods. Just like that, it had vanished. I had almost all but forgotten Marie was there until the softness of her voice had brought me back to earth with a Kenzie. What the fuck was I turned to her. Her skin had gone sheet white and her eyes were red with tears. My legs had finally given out from the sheer exhaustion of it all as I had fallen to my knees, Marie quickly running over and catching me in an embrace as we silently wept. I'm not sure too much of what happened after that. It's all a blur really. I told some people at first, but they were quick to laugh me off as a liar or that I was simply being over-imaginative, with Marie moving away about a year later and my only witness having gone. That didn't help my credibility. It's been 10 years since then. I no longer live in Nova Scotia and actually live in the same town as my best Marie again. We still bring this up to each other every now and again but refrain from telling most anyone else out of fear of being labeled crazy. My last words I'd like to say are pretty blunt. If you live in Nova Scotia, Canada, please be careful. There is something living in the woods and it is not human. Third story. My friend and I went hiking and I'm starting to think she never left those woods. This story was shared by you/Jamfrons, so credits to him. My friend Samantha and I were so excited to take a road trip together to go hiking somewhere further from home. We'd been talking about it since we graduated college a few years back and finally found the time. Well, she always made the time. It was mainly me that had trouble balancing work with anything else. Looking back now, I wish I had spent more of this trip focusing on Sam, the scenery, and being present in the moment. I wish I had been a better friend. Sam was the most excited for our trip. The week before we left, she was texting me about restaurants in the area, stuff to do. She made a Spotify playlist with both of our favorites so we could listen to 7 hours worth of an eclectic mix of classic rock, pop, and black metal, and was marking trailheads we might enjoy on her Google Maps app. I felt bad for putting the trip off for so long. We gotta catch up, explore, try cool food. We had a great trip up until our final hike. We're both in decent shape and since we had the supplies and plenty of daylight we decided we were going to try a longer, unpaved trail that went around this beautiful lake. It was the last hike of our trip and we decided to take a more difficult and less crowded trail. Initially, it was a wonderful hike. The water was such a surreal shade of blue, and the pine trees and rolling hills were breathtaking. The air was thinner than we were used to, but so refreshing. As we hiked around one bend, I almost ran right into Sam's back. I had been falling behind focusing on placing my feet in exactly the right locations in the soft dirt so I didn't go sliding down 20 feet to the shore. Sam stood frozen, a deer in front of her blocking the trail. As I approached with my backpack jingling and breathing heavily, the deer stood for a moment more, tilting its head sideways at me before darting back into the pines. She looked back at me, her face tight. Did you see that? The deer? Yeah, it was pretty magical. She gave a little laugh as she started up again so we could both move on to the section of the trail that had sturdier footing. No, I mean, something was wrong with that deer. It was way too comfortable around me, and I don't know if you could see or hear it, but it was drooling and making these weird sounds. We continued on in silence after that as we focused on our footing and the scenery, stopping every so often to take pictures. One time, when we were stopped, we heard rustling to our right, higher up on the hill. I got the bear spray out and held onto it. It seemed to be walking parallel to us, roughly matching our pace. It sounded big, too. Eventually the hiking trail rose to meet the higher part of the hill, and I couldn't help but sigh in relief. I'd been so worried I'd roll my ankle and tumble down the mountain, so it was good to have more room so I wasn't walking right on the edge. Back in college I'd sprained my ankle badly but couldn't afford to see a doctor. It healed a bit oddly, and since then my left ankle has been iffy. After a while, I needed to sit for a moment, walking uphill for an hour. In addition to the 6,500-foot elevation, I was struggling. Maybe I'm also a bit more out of shape than I had been willing to admit, too. Sam sat with me for a moment, but then saw some wildflowers about 10 feet into the woods and left to go take a quick picture. With her gone, I felt a sudden chill. Something was watching me. "Sam," I called out nervously as the rustling grew louder, and I gripped my container of bear spray tightly. It stepped out of the woods, and it was just a deer. Or, more specifically, it was the deer, the same one that Sam had encountered. Now that she had pointed it out, I could see what she was saying. The deer had no issues approaching me. It was scrawny, walked slowly, but like it had a bit too much to drink, and it was definitely drooling. I jumped up and waved my arms at it. "Go away." I knew it was sick and the poor thing was confused and probably suffering, but it creeped me the hell out. It cocked its head and seemed to be studying me, looking me up and down. It approached me and made some sort of gasping sound. It was opening and closing its mouth in a way which deeply unsettled me for some reason. "Sam." She came running towards me from the woods, and when I turned back it had gone. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" The creepy deer was back. "I know it sounds silly, but think it's been following us." I told her how it had been behaving. "Do you think it's rabid?" "Poor baby," she said sympathetically, "possibly. Or, I wonder if it has CWD. Either way, we should probably let the park rangers know just in case." We had decided we'd stick together, but after a few miles, she ended up ahead of me again. She tends to inch forward to get pictures, whereas I tend to walk past sites, then have regrets and double back to take pictures. I had walked back a bit and was sitting down angling my phone weirdly to try and fit the scene in front of me in the frame when I heard Sam's voice, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. "Hey, I'll be right there," I said, my voice raised slightly, assuming she was talking to me. Then, she screamed. "Sam." I stood up and tried to walk as quickly and carefully as possible. Her screaming changed from fear to agony, and it sounded like she was sobbing. I wasn't sure what happened, but I could tell she was scared and likely hurt. I suddenly realized I was still holding our only canister of bear spray. Against my better judgment, I started running as fast as I could, and for a while I was making good time, but then my left foot landed a patch of soft dirt at the edge of the trail, my ankle rolled, and I was falling. I don't remember hitting the ground, but I remember opening my eyes, flat on my back, about 15 feet below where I had been standing. It was also dark outside. We'd started hiking at least 6 to 7 hours before sunset. I tried to stand, but it was a struggle. I was confused, disoriented, trying to get up was taking all my energy and focus. I had a deep feeling of dread I couldn't explain. As I started slowly moving upwards on my hands and knees, I tried to recall what had happened leading up to my fall. Sam sounded hurt. She was screaming. I had run after her and then I fell. "Shit, Sam." I called her name, my voice hoarse, but no response. My phone was surprisingly only minorly damaged, but I had no reception. Luckily, since it had been buckled to me, I still had our backpack. I dug through it. We had first aid kits, but I figured I could patch myself up later. I didn't want to stay down here any longer than I had to. I found my knife and my headlamp. After about 20 minutes I had slowly, and painfully, ascended back towards where I had fallen from. My hands were raw and I could feel my right knee bleeding through my pants. I was trying to go slowly since I trusted my feet even less now, and dizziness was starting to creep in, but panic and fear drove me forward. Once I made it back to the trail, I had to sit for a moment. I heard rustling behind me and felt a sudden pang of fear. Something or someone had injured Sam, and here I was sitting alone, injured, with my back to the woods, in the dark. I tried calling her name, in case it was her that I heard. No response. I stood up and started limping as quickly as possible towards the direction that I had last heard her scream. Luckily the ground had evened out, because I could feel myself weaving unsteadily. I knew that something terrible may have happened to her, but kept trying to keep that thought out of my mind. As my calls to her remained unanswered and it became harder to imagine a scenario in which she was okay, I felt my throat tighten and tears rolled down my cheeks. I kept looking for her. I knew she wouldn't just leave me here. I think part of me knew then that she was gone. She would have been searching for me if she was okay, and even if she left to get help, I think they would have found me by then. Somehow, eventually I navigated my way to where I thought she had last been. I was hoping maybe if she was injured, she was okay and just out of it and confused like I was. My foot caught in the mud and I fell. Lights flashed behind my eyelids and I felt overcome with nausea. The light from my headlamp had greatly dimmed, as it was now coated in mud and grime. I heard movement behind me. As the smell hit me, I realized the mud was dirt mixed with blood. I could taste it, mixed with the gritty texture. Leaves covered with what was likely blood stuck to my face and I felt something soft and wet under my shoulder. The rustling behind me became discernible as footsteps. I felt around for my knife, my bear spray, but instead felt something hard, sticky. I was certain I had just found out what happened to Sam and had a good guess at what was about to happen next to me. I felt no urge to get up as the footsteps got closer. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I closed my eyes trying to focus on something, anything else, not knowing if I wanted to see what was coming for me. The footsteps stopped, and I could hear labored breathing coming from above me. I waited, and then as no blows came, I opened my eyes. It was Sam. She stood over me, breathing heavily from her mouth. She was covered in blood. Her shirt and pants were torn, but she was alive. I let out a relieved sob and then could no longer hold back the tears. "Oh my God," I whispered, as I slowly moved to sitting, and then standing. "I thought I had lost you." I pulled her close to me into a hug. She stood motionless, her arms at her side. She stuck to me where her shirt was still a bit wet. Dried blood covered the neck of her shirt, in her midsection. Her hands, and unsettlingly, her mouth, were also smeared with blood. I could still hear her breathing heavily close to my ear. "What happened?" I asked, as I released her. She stared at me, but didn't respond. I figured she was a bit traumatized. Frankly, I wasn't sure how she was up and standing at all after whatever had happened. She was a bit wobbly but otherwise seemed to be able to walk. As we walked towards the car, she fell behind me, which made me nervous as I didn't want to let her out of my sight. She kept stopping, staring over her shoulder, while I tried to coax her forward. Eventually, after what felt like forever, we made it back. My ankle was killing me, but I had tried to move as fast as possible. Although the woods were eerily silent, I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. When we got to her car, I was debating if we should drive ourselves to the hospital or call 911. I had this feeling of terror that I couldn't shake. I pictured us making it all the way here to the car and then something breaking the windows, attacking us. I decided we needed to leave now. Do you have your keys? Do you think you can drive? I asked. She had an old Jeep pickup and was very sensitive about other people driving her baby, plus I wasn't sure I could drive us with my ankle as it was. She said nothing, cocked her head at me. I know, we look like we've been mauled by a bear. I caught myself and winced, feeling suddenly insensitive. She clearly had been attacked by something or someone. When she said nothing, displayed no emotion or reaction, I cautiously continued, but I have a bad feeling. I think we need to leave, like right now. I'd rather call for help when we're back on the main road, or just drive straight to the hospital. She remained motionless, staring back into the woods, and I wondered if she lost her keys in whatever struggle she had. Luckily, I had her spare with me. I unlocked the doors and she continued to stand outside. I realized I would need to punish my ankle a bit more because she was far too out of it to drive. I slid in, but she remained motionless. Sam, get in, please. Something is out here still. Please. She was licking her lips, staring back at me again. In the darkness, her blue eyes looked almost black. I limped back out of the seat and opened her door for her, and had to guide her in. I buckled her in after she made no move to do so for herself. As we drove in, headlights of passing cars illuminated the interior. I kept checking on her out of the corner of my eye. She was breathing in and out of her mouth and staring at me. I noticed now, in the better light, that she was drooling. Hey, how are you doing? No response, but she began opening and closing her mouth and making a wet gasping sound as she breathed in and out. Her breath reeked and her teeth were tinged pink. I don't have much medical knowledge, but I was worried she had a punctured lung due to the strange sounds she was making. Hold tight, we're about 20 minutes from the hospital. Despite my ankle, I drove as fast as I could. We made it in 10. As we pulled up, I helped guide her out of the car and walked behind her, steadying her. I noticed something. Her shirt was on inside out. It hadn't been this morning. Likely because of how we looked, they found rooms for us immediately in the ER. I had a bad sprain and a concussion, and would need a few stitches, but it felt so good just to be out of those woods. I asked the nurse that came to check on me about how Sam was doing. I mentioned to him I'm not sure if she was attacked by an animal or a person. I mentioned what I had noticed about her shirt, and that we may have encountered a sick animal, in case any of that helped. When he returned, he was clearly distressed. Sam was gone. She hadn't appeared to be outwardly injured, strangely, but they had wanted to assess for internal trauma. However, the first moment they had left her alone, she had just walked out, judging by the bloody footprints. It's been weeks and I haven't seen Sam since. Her mom hasn't either. She has been working with the police out here. They think Sam has a head wound, and is just confused and will turn up in town eventually. But, a few days ago, I heard on the news that a partial skeleton was found on the trail we were on. Likely the victim of an animal attack, they said, and due to the condition of the body, they were asking for leads so they could use dental records to help identify the victim. This might sound crazy, but I think it's her they found. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think Sam ever left those woods that night. It's my fault, and I don't know what that thing was that I drove into town. If you live in southern Colorado, please be safe. Fourth story. The time I saw Wendigo. This story was shared by /I Merciless Void, so credits to him. First things first, this happened to me when I was around 10. I've lived in Idaho all my life and spent a lot of time outside or in the wilderness as a kid. My grandparents would take me camping, and my older brother and I would always hike up whatever trails we could find to get a view of the sunset. On one of these occasions, something terrifying happened. We were up at a campsite I only know as Warm River. The river there never freezes over, and my brother and I were on a regular evening hike. There was an old tunnel bored through the mountain at one part of the trail, probably an old train tunnel, and we were walking through it when I heard something I'll never forget. After walking through probably 2/3 of the way through the tunnel, I heard a terrible screech at the end we entered through. The screech wasn't like anything I've heard before. I've heard the screams of animals on dark and windy nights. I even think I've heard Bigfoot calls a few times, but never the metallic, grinding screech I heard that day. The point is, whatever the sound was, it did not sound natural in any capacity. I probably jumped 5 feet in the air when I heard it, and my brother shouted a few choice curses before shooing me quickly to the exit of the tunnel. At this point, my brother decided we should just continue walking and head back after whatever made the noise hopefully cleared out. We didn't have any firearms on us, so I was pretty upset. My brother reassured me we would be fine, and we made the walk back without incident. However, I didn't get any sleep that night. Whether it was the thing that screeched at us or just my imagination, I heard things moving around the campsite the whole night, as well as whispers echoing through the darkness outside the trailer. I woke my brother up a few times to check out what it was, but he refused each time, telling me that it was probably just other campers staying up late and enjoying themselves. The rest of the trip was pretty normal. We packed up the following day and my life continued as normal. I was disconcerted but chalked what happened up as a harmless event that I must have been exaggerating in retrospect. A few weeks later I went up to Pine Basin, an old ski lodge my family rented each year for family reunions. Here I would mess around with my cousins, our favorite activities being night games. We would play hide and seek, a game called Ghosts in the Graveyard, and other games like that. On one instance, I was chosen to be the seeker for a hide-and-seek game. Because I was one of the younger cousin, I got a flashlight as an advantage. Normally, all the younger cousins hid close to the lodge and the older cousins hid in the nearby trees or at the base of the nearby mountain. As I was searching near the bottom of the mountain, I heard a familiar whistle up the mountain a bit. We would always whistle as a hint at our locations. It sounded like someone was hiding way up near a tree known as the underwear tree. You can guess why, so I began trekking up toward the whistle. As I climbed closer, I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I continued on wearily, and convinced myself that I would be fine. I hated walking in the night alone, but figured whoever I find would walk me back to the lodge. As I neared the tree, I noticed that it was deathly silent. This alerted me that something was very wrong, because you could always hear the adults having fun back at the lodge. I was anxious to hurry back, so I called out, "I found you, Scott." I thought the whistle was my older cousins. "Come back down with me." I got no reply, but I wasn't planning on waiting. As I began walking back down the path, I heard a voice call, "You almost had me," so I ran back up to investigate. I flashed my light in the branches of the tree, and saw a monstrosity that was not my cousin. It looked like a poorly drawn stick figure made into a human with its emaciated figure and lifeless eyes. I remember its face looked like the skin on its head was being pulled from behind. It had torn and stretched features. As soon as I saw the creature, I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and ran back to the lodge. The entire time I ran, I was overcome by an overpowering smell, and I could hear the thing running after me. As I approached the camp, I saw a few people, my cousins, at the bottom of the mountain waiting for me. I was crying and shaking, and they took me inside. I told my dad what happened, but my cousins all said they didn't see anything following me. The adults kept us inside for the night, and I kept hearing sounds drifting in from the mountains. I never played night games after that happened, and was always terrified that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Ever since that night, I have always felt uneasy up in those mountains. I used to be really religious and figured it was a demon of some kind trying to kill me or something like that, but those mountains have never felt the same after that incident. A few years ago, the game Until Dawn became really popular, and I watched a walkthrough of it on YouTube. When the Wendigo first appeared in game, I got chills down my spine. It was exactly what I saw, and I did a ton of research on them. I figure someone must have gotten snowed in at that old lodge and resorted to cannibalism, but that doesn't explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech from time to time. It never occurred to me until watching Until Dawn that they might be from the same thing, and it scares the hell out of me every time. I heard it earlier tonight, and that's why I decided to finally write my story down. Fifth story. This story was shared on r/scary stories, so credits to them. Wendigo story. I honestly don't know where to start or if I'm ready to be posting this story of mine. But hopefully it'll help. I know you won't believe me, and honestly I won't even blame you guys. It still doesn't make sense in my own head. I've heard stories about unknown creatures in woods, but never thought I'd encounter one myself, you know? I posted another story about some creepy old people that I had encountered in the woods, but that's nothing. This makes a good horror story for people, but it eats me every day. But here we go. I love to go hiking. I go with my 3-year-old German Shepherd, and let her go unleashed since we like to go to secluded places. Now I have been hiking all over Utah mountains, and wanted a new hike that wasn't too far from me. I have an app that tells me about hikes near me, if it is a hard hike, reviews, and if it's dog friendly. Now I was scrolling through AllTrail looking for possibly something new, but I wasn't too hopeful. But to my delight, there was something new. I don't know why I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember it was at the bottom of the list and it had one review saying good. I thought that was kind of strange, mostly because people love to review hikes and try to tell the city what they can do to improve the hike and make it more safe, but I figured it wasn't a popular hike. So the next day Kyrie and I packed up our stuff and went up towards the hike. I always carry first aid kit, extra food, a knife, and just emergency stuff in case I get lost. It's important to mention now that Kyrie eats a raw diet. Meaning she eats raw meat, not cooked, and since we were going so early in the morning I thought I could bring some with us. I put it in her blue backpack I make her wear and decided when it was getting warmer we would stop to eat. Where I live, there's a long drive through the canyon and many roads going towards the hike you'd like to go on. This one was a little further than I'm used to, but I didn't care, it was new and I was excited, so was Kyrie. She cries in the car until we get there. Now I was following the directions on my phone and saw that it had led me towards a thin road that was hidden. No wonder I haven't heard of this place, it was hidden and far up the mountain. The road only fit one car, so the whole time I was so anxious that another car would come down, and how I would handle that, but there never was. I never saw another car. When I got to the parking lot, if I could call it that, I noticed there was only space for like 3 cars. All in a tight space. It was small, so I decided to park my car with the front facing towards the road. I thought maybe it was private property, checked the app, but it didn't say anything about private property. I shrugged it off, got Kyrie out, prepared us, and saw the trail. Now, even though I knew there wasn't anyone parked there, I kept Kyrie on a leash. I didn't know if there were bikers along the trail, but after 30 minutes or so I didn't see anyone. I decided to let her off leash. It was a steep hike for the first half, but it was beautiful. We were deep in the woods, and I felt at peace. I used to wear headphones when I hiked, but didn't anymore, so I was enjoying the natural sounds of the forest. It was still early in the morning, so I wore a light jacket and decided when it got warmer I'd give Kyrie her breakfast. Now, before you start to hate, I know bringing Kyrus raw meat was absolutely stupid and ignorant of me. I had never seen a bear or wolf or anything, so I got cocky and just thought it was okay. I learned my lesson the bad day, so no need to tell me I was dumb. But honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you commented that. Now here is where we begin the bad part of this story. The trail finally stopped being steep and sort of an easy hike from here. When you got to the top, you could see through the trees a beautiful open meadow. On the other side of it, you can hear a river and a waterfall. The trail went around the meadow. The meadow was absolutely beautiful with the mountains in the background, the sound of the water. This hike was almost the most beautiful one I had ever been to. When Kyrie and I were sort of in the center of the meadow, she stopped right in front of me and looked towards the meadow. Kyrie always walked ahead of me, and when she stopped I stopped since I trusted her judgment. Before I could look, the smell hit me first. You know, the typical rotting smell, but oh my God. Words cannot explain how bad it stank. It burned my nose, and started to make me tear up. I put my shirt over my nose, feeling nauseous, and looked over to where Kyrie was looking. In the middle of the meadow was a deer. Now, I've only seen does, but never a male deer in person. But his antlers were huge. Have you ever seen Princess Mononoke? When he sees the deer spirit walking across the water, and how big his antlers were. Almost like that. The beauty of the deer was amazing, but not enough to take away the disgusting smell that was making me sick. The deer was looking towards the mountains and away from me. I thought maybe Kyra's food was going bad. I checked that and it seemed fine. When I looked up again, the deer was looking towards our direction. I noticed that Kyra's hackles went up at that. She started to cry nervously. Now, I've heard of Wendigos and skinwalkers. I am Native American. It is common for these creatures to be in our childhood stories. That, and also listening to scary stories on YouTube. Now, when Kyrie did that, I got a bad feeling in my stomach despite the sickness. It was a Wendigo, and I knew that. Now I didn't know what to do. These creatures were only a part of my stories to make me go to bed, not to instructions of what to do. Plus, my grandmother was the one with the stories and passed away. She was the one with the experience, not my mom or anyone else. I glanced at Kyrie again when she cried, and looked back towards the creature. It started to stand on its hind legs. Holy hell, it was fucking tall, and it faced my direction. It started to walk towards me. I was going to run until I heard in my head, I am the one of this land. Suddenly it started to run towards me, full speed. I screamed, called Kyrie, and started to run. Kyrie was following behind me. I started to cry as I was running since I could hear it catch up to me. It was loud. It was destroying everything it came in contact with to get to me. The adrenaline running through me was making me just focus on running. I didn't know where to go, I just ran. The trail suddenly got smaller and bushes with thorns started to appear, but I didn't feel them as they caught my arms. As I heard it got closer, it suddenly went to the left as I ran straight. I somehow had the balls to look back to see it was gone, but also Kyrie. "Kyrie?" I said, but right as I called out for her, the trail ended with a foot drop onto a patch of rocks. I hit my head, bleeding a bit. But again I couldn't feel it that much and just got up. I looked towards the forest when I suddenly heard a loud cry from my right. It was Kyrie. "Kyrie!" I cried out. I stood up, crying and lost at what to do. I looked back to see a river leading up to the waterfall I heard. Suddenly a heavy weight ran into me and we both fell back. I hit my head again on the back and looked up to see Kyrie. Kyrie had blood all over her. It was pouring from her neck. "Kyrie!" I cried out. She was whimpering and breathing heavy. She still had her backpack on with some cuts in it. Before I had a chance to help her, a scream came from the forest. I looked back at the waterfall, and somehow had the strength to pick up my 85-pound dog and carry her. I don't know where I was planning to go. I was just running to the waterfall as if it was a safe place. I was almost there when I heard the creature land on the rocks that I did early. I tripped at that and looked back to see it looking at me. Its eyes were black, or I think so. It could also be that there wasn't anything in there. I don't know. I took off Kyra's backpack and threw it towards the monster, hoping it would take the meat and just leave us alone. I was scooting back towards the waterfall, crying as I did so, holding and dragging Kyrie with my left arm. I found that being so close to the creature made me literally weak to my knees. It walked over to me, taking huge steps. It looked so different than before. Before it looked like a deer, and now as it crawled over to me it looked like a monster. I don't know how else to describe this awful demon. I don't. I'm sorry. But I felt water hit my head hard as I had reached the waterfall. I kept going until I was up against the wall. There barely enough space where water wasn't hitting Kyrie and his faces. Kyrie felt limp at this point. I could somewhat see the creature through the water, but still saw it coming towards me. It stood on its hind legs when it was close enough to me, watching me. The smell was so disgusting, I couldn't help but throw up in my mouth. It reached his arms out to grab me. I screamed so loud. I actually lost my voice. After I let out that scream, another scream came from the deep forest. The creature snapped its head almost completely backward, looking towards the scream. The scream sounded like the one this one had let out earlier. I was still holding on to Kyrie, crying and screaming since its arm was close. It looked back to me, pulling its arm away, and again said in my mind, "I am the one of this land." With that, it took steps back watching me and went down the river bank. It crawled on all fours, stopping next to Kyra's backpack. It ripped it apart and pulled out the meat, eating it with the plastic bag that it was in. It suddenly screamed and ran towards that direction of the scream from earlier. When I thought it was gone, I stood up shakily and carried Kyrie towards the trail again. When I was running, I came across my backpack that I had left earlier and stopped. It was ripped apart, so I took off my jacket and wrapped it around Kyra's neck where she was bleeding a lot. After that, I barely remember. All I remember is carrying Kyrie and driving down, screaming the whole way towards the emergency vet. They asked us what happened and I told them it was a bear. They called the ambulance since I had blood all over me and they couldn't tell if it was mine or Kyra's. Kyrie made it through surgery and had to have some stitches on her, along with a pad. It didn't really heal and a huge bump grew on there. It had been infected but eventually got better. She also had a bite mark on the top of her left eye, but that healed much better. They pulled out a 4-inch tooth. I don't have it because I couldn't even look at it, but they declared it from a bear. Even though they said it looked weird. While I was waiting for Kyrie, I went to look up the trail on the app, and it was gone. Why or how, but it is. I don't remember where it is either. That's all a blur. I have some pictures up of Kyrie. The one with my niece is a hike my mom took her on with my niece. It had been weeks after and my mom thought to try and help her through it. Kyrie looks nervous in the picture, but you can see the huge bump on the left side of her neck. There's also a picture with Kyrus and her bandages around her neck. And the one that is the most recent of her neck, it's black. The stitches came out. The last picture is of the top of her head, also black, but it's healed now. I'll find some way to post them. I haven't been hiking since, and I refuse to let Kyrie go. That time my mom took her, she did it while I was at work, but regretted it because she said Kyrie was crying and was so scared they had to just go home. My mom knows. I screamed at night from nightmares for a week or two. My mom put white candles in my room to get rid of the bad spirits attracted to my negativity. So yeah, here's my story. I've heard stories where people saw Wendigo and they didn't get harmed, and God, I wish I went through that. I hate hiking. My therapist thinks I may have some PTSD, but only knows of it as a bear. I'm getting through it, Kyrie is too. Hopefully one day I can go back, but I don't see that being for a while. Please, if you're going to go up to the mountains, please prepare. Mother Nature is not only unpredictable but has things in there that just don't make sense in our heads. So please be safe. I say that with serious sincerity. If there's any other subreddits I can post this to, I would love to know, so I can share my story and maybe help others out there. Thanks for reading. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.